So this morning, my talk is on time. Time is one of our most important resources. It's a scarce resource, and I'll argue it's an underutilized resource. When I think about time, I love this conversation that my wife and I had with Louise Leakey at the TED conference 10 years ago. Louise is from the family that discovered Homo sapiens in Kenya. Their arrival 200,000 years ago. And she has a really fun analogy she likes to use for talking about time and the greatest spans of time. So let's hear from her directly.
All of the Earth's history is 400 sheets long in the toilet bowl, right? It's 4.5 billion years. Fast forward to the 19th square from the end, which is when you have the beginning of the age of the dinosaurs, and they're around for 14 sheets of toilet paper, and they go extinct. On the 5th square from the end, they've been around for 14 squares. Then, the last half of the last square is where we have a common ancestor with the great apes, which is about 8 to 6 million years. There's all sorts going on in that, but the last 2 millimeters is our story in terms of Homo sapiens. And so we can barely draw that on the last square of the toilet paper, and particularly as humans, we went extinct 75,000 years ago. We came out of Africa from less than 10,000 individuals and populated the world. So it's just this tiny, tiny slice in time, and there's such a good chance
but
we
a
might never
huge
have been
impact.
heard of. Yeah, look at the impact we've had.
Two things jump out to me, besides it being toilet paper. The dinosaurs. They were around for a very, very long time. I just had no concept of the time frame, and kind of explains, I guess, why there's so much oil and gas underneath the surface. And then that final square, we can't even see Homo sapiens in that. It's so small at this scale. So let's go into that last square. That's that 200,000 years ago that Louise talked about, the rise of Homo sapiens. 75,000 years ago is the next line, and that's when 10,000 or so left to populate the world we have today. And then I added a line, which is 10,000 years ago, the domestication of plants and animals by Homo sapiens, another very important event. And that rolls into another talk that was given at an early Tugboat Ventures annual meeting many years before this conversation with Louise. And this was the slide that Paul Romer showed. And you can see that on the x-axis is years, and then the y-axis is lumens per hour worked. And a lumen is the equivalent of a candle's light. And what Paul said is, look, for the longest time, even during this period, we were not that productive. We could not create that much output. Then we started notching up, and then it went vertical. And the vertical is the Industrial Revolution and the scientific method. And what Paul basically said is, we learned how to take all these elements on the planet that have been here forever, 4.5 billion years, and start mixing them together in these really novel recipes and creating amazing things like jet planes. It's incredible. And just to bring the scale in here for you, if in 1800 you wanted to buy 1,000 lumens, it cost you roughly $786, today's dollars. Today, that would be less than 20 cents. That's a 99.97% reduction. And Paul wanted to just express, look at that incredible productivity we've developed. And this is just being one example of that. So let's zoom in 100 years to 1923. What did things feel like then? Well, if you had a phone, you were pretty lucky because there's only 13 million worldwide. As you know, everybody has a phone today. 55% of urban homes had indoor plumbing, less had electrification. If you were rural, these percentages were much lower, 99% of all homes today. And this is pretty remarkable. Extreme poverty, now measured by the World Bank at $2.15 or less per day. There was 2 billion people in extreme poverty in 1967. I couldn't even get the numbers for 1923, but it's still an amazing story. 2 billion, that was 57% of the human population was in extreme poverty. Today, that's 650 million people, at least a couple years ago, less than 8%. That's an incredible amount of progress to get people out of extreme poverty. If you're thinking about rockets, you're probably playing with fireworks. You didn't know of the work being done early by Robert Goddard. If you had actually flown a commercial airline in 1923, you probably lived in Florida and you're going to the islands, because this was the only commercial airline in the United States in 1923. And life expectancy was 57 years for a man. I turned 57 this year. That kind of hits home for me. 73 for males today, 61 and a half for women in 1923, now 79. Interesting enough, these numbers have come down quite a bit since COVID. It used to be 76 for men and 81 for women. And we'll see this come back around, but COVID did have an impact. And as far as infant mortality, incredible progress. 1923, 8 to 10% of babies died in the first year. Today, that's less than 0.6%. So now I'm going to hone in even further to a 10-year time frame. This is 2013. I'm working in Palo Alto. I have a home in Menlo Park. My family lives in Sun Valley. I'm commuting, and they're doing some commuting too. But more importantly, what was happening at the macro level? The federal government, the Federal Reserve at least, had decided to lower rates dramatically. You guys know about this. It was a 40-year march to reduce rates. So they've been low for some time. But around 2013, something started happening in the investor psychology. And investors started realizing we cannot earn a return on fixed income. So we're going to have to start reallocating our portfolios to riskier assets, alternative assets, venture capital, private equity, hedge. So our blended rate of return will actually be back where we need to be. So VC was a tremendous beneficiary of this. In 2013, $53 billion raised. Last year, $250 billion, 5 times more. The red box down there is $25 billion. That was the amount of capital raised by the entire venture capital industry in its first 40 years. And if you see my presentation, The Moment of Divergence, you've seen this slide. That $25 billion was invested in thousands of companies. These are the logos of some of those companies invested in with that $25 billion. Note Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. All 4 companies worth over $1 trillion, some worth close to $3 trillion. For those logos alone, combined revenues, $1.2 trillion. That is a heck of a return on investment. $25 billion to $1.2 trillion in revenues. Let's contrast that with Uber, a poster child of this get big fast, going to get, growth at all cost type of environment we had in venture capital. $29 billion raised over 9 years. Last year, a remarkable $8.6 billion in revenues, and they lost $300 million. How do you make a return on $29 billion when you can't even generate a positive cash flow last year? And you can see there's a tremendous destruction of capital in my mind, and waste on the right, and incredible efficiencies on the left. All of that done before that moment of divergence. And back in 2013, a lot of people I admired were starting to grumble. They're saying things are really changing around here. And this was captured this in the Wall Street Journal. This is Arthur Rock. And he said, these guys are arrogant. He said, referring to venture capitalists and entrepreneurs alike. Today they feel like they want to cash out as quickly as possible. That isn't how I played the game. This next quote was actually from 6 weeks ago in the New York Times. Who doesn't want to get their share, whether money, status, fame, before it all runs out? As if that was the game we were playing, trying to build these wonderful companies. So private equity also benefited. Almost $500 billion raised last year. And last year, because of the debt markets, you could actually put 2-to-1 leverage on this. So they had another $1 trillion of purchasing power to add to the $500 million for a total of $1.5 trillion in 1 year alone. If you sum up the past 10 years, you're looking over $10 trillion of purchase power by these private equity firms. And they used it. They bought lots of companies. You might remember this chart from my presentation, The Rise of Private Equity, but they owned a couple hundred companies in 1991, owned almost 8,000 in 2018, as we see the slow decline in the number of public companies. So we reached out to PitchBook. We wanted to get the updated chart. They don't have it, but they gave us the numbers as of last week. And there's 11,200 companies now owned by private equity. This march has just continued up and to the right. Public companies, interesting, have gone up to over 8,000. But the problem with this is there's some very low quality companies that went public in the last few years, particularly the SPACs. There's over 1,200 of those, and I believe 97% are trading at less than their offering price. And Lordstown filed for bankruptcy today, one of the star SPACs.
The number you see up on the right represents our analysis. Conservatively, almost 10% of U.S. private sector employees now work for private equity firms, either directly or indirectly.
And I hate to say this, but it is going to be a really tough period over the next couple of years for the people that work under those private equity firms, those portfolio companies, because their leverage levels are far too high and they're going to have to refinance their debt at much higher rates. At the same time, the IPO market is completely shut to these guys. There's no way you can take a company public that's got 7 times EBITDA in debt. They're going to have to reduce that down to about half. So they're going to have this incredible compression between reducing debt and paying for higher interest rates. And it's going to be borne on the back of employees. And I think it's going to be really sad. But we'll hear more about it, I'm sure, in the next year or two. There's also an ecosystem that benefited from this. Investment banks, law firms, executive recruiters, consulting firms, they all participated in all this capital moving into alternative assets and scaled up their businesses too. So you can understand why when somebody is talking to anybody in this ecosystem says, should I be taking my company public? The answer would be, of course you should. That's what you should do, because these guys do really well when that happens also. Also, when they raise lots of venture capital, they do quite well. So let's talk about ownership time horizons, getting back to time. Public companies, the average shareholder holds the stock for less than a year. The companies themselves, the boards and the management team, will try to operate to a multi-year time frame, but the truth is if they're going to miss the quarter, all that matters is the quarter. Everything matters against that quarter. For the PE-backed company, the owner will say, I want to be in and out in 3 years. I can tolerate 5 years, but 3 to 5 years. But the truth is the management teams of those companies operate to 30-day cycles. They have to be on plan every 30 days, or those private equity firms will be all over them. And then the venture capital-backed companies, because these companies are built to raise cash, not generate cash, they will last as long as the amount of money they raised. It's typically 18 to 24 months is the average raise. So their cycle is 18 to 24 months before they have to do that next round of financing. So they need to know what's it going to take to raise that additional capital. The first institutional money that comes in from the venture capitalists, their period is about 5 to 7 years, maybe as much as 10. But it really does operate to a shorter cycle. So I want to just hit this because this story really struck me earlier this year. And this is this idea you got to make the quarter. So Mark Benioff has been telling his team for 2 decades, we are Ohana. We are Ohana. We are family. We're family tied. We're family bonded. That's who we are at Salesforce.com. Well, earlier this year, generating $7 billion of cash, $15 billion on the balance sheet, they let go of 8,000 employees. Let them go. Why? Because of an outside investor, Elliott Management, put pressure on him, said, you are not a disciplined operator. Mark said, I'm going to show you how disciplined I am. I'm going to let 8,000 people go. What about Ohana? What about family? He has destroyed that culture. I don't think he'll ever recover from what he did this year. So it's back to 2013. So I'm kind of wondering, things like Arthur Rock, friends of mine, just the observations I'm making, where are the good companies? Where are the companies like this one with Bill Hewitt on the left and Dave Packard on the right? That's my little name tag from working 4 summers at HP in the manufacturing environment and hearing about these 2 men so admired by the people on the front lines, making the products that they sold. They stood for this idea of the HP way. Tom Peters talked about this in Search of Excellence. Dave Packard wrote a great book called The HP Way. And I felt that. That was my first experience in a corporate environment. And note that long-term view, because I'm going to come back to that. So I started a learning journey. It was into 2012, into 2013. It was sparked by this woman, Jessica Heron, in the top left. And it actually happened many years earlier. She came to me in 2006 and she said, Dave, I really liked you and your partners at Kleiner Perkins. I hate your model. We had backed her during the dot-com boom. And I said, okay, Jessica, where are we going with this? She goes, I'm starting a new company. And I'm never going to take it public and I'm never going to sell it. I said, you know what? You deserve that. You deserve to own and run a lifestyle business. And she bristled. She goes, lifestyle business? What are you talking about? She goes, I'm going to build a large consumer brand, and I'm going to touch the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of women. I said, Jessica, you can't do that today. To build a consumer brand, a real consumer brand, costs $250 million. That's what we're prepared to do as venture capitalists. Whatever amount we first put in, we'll put in up to $250 million. And she goes, you didn't ask me about the time frame. I'm going to do this over the course of the rest of my life. And in that time frame, I can do it with my own fuel. And that's what I'm going to do. Mac Harmon, I met Mac in 2013. He's in the heart of Silicon Valley in Redwood City, doing some very creative stuff around artificial Christmas trees. And I met with him, no interest in going public, no interest in being sold, very purpose-driven, talked a lot about being people first. And I'm like, this guy, he kind of feels like Dave and Bill. I'm starting to find these guys. That's Chuck Holloway, one of my advisors also in that photo with him. And then Jed York and others. I met a few multi-generational family business heads, and I started learning about these companies with a little more longevity and the tremendous responsibility that Jed felt in stewarding the legacy of his grandfather's business, who had bought the San Francisco 49ers back in the late 1970s, and the desire to get it back to a winning tradition, because that's what his grandfather would want, and that's what would be good for the fans. And this is Amy Christensen and her late father, Clay Christensen, and Michael Horn. The three of us talked, and they really highlighted something for me. They said, you know what's really sad about venture capital today? In this rush to get big fast, they've forgotten how you create market-creating firms based on new technology disruption. She said, fundamentally, you have to give the markets time to develop, and they're typically small markets. You have to give time for the technology to develop. That takes time. It may take more than a decade, but in this rush to get big fast, you're driving all the entrepreneurs to go after large existing markets, not let them slowly grow in small markets and then pursue larger markets. And they said, we're really concerned, because that's where good jobs come from. And this woman on the right is Roberta Katz, Vice Provost at Stanford. My mentor, late Burt McMurtry, said, I'd really like you to meet with her. We've had some interesting conversations about your learning journey. I was surprising Burt regularly about this. She and I sat down, we talked, and she said, with absolute clarity, I see exactly what you see out there, what's happening here in Silicon Valley and the erosion of the values, and what's actually happening in the general business community. So I want to encourage you, do this. Figure out these evergreen companies, figure out a way to support them. That would be really, really good. So I invited her to be a Tugboat advisor, which she became. As you know, she helped me write the purpose statement later for Tugboat Institute. So in October 2013, I'd met about 60 of these folks in my explorations. I asked the question, who do you know that wants to build a meaningful company who has not raised venture capital or private equity and has no plans to go public or be sold? And I was kind of in the dark. I was just feeling around, working my networks. I'd talked to about 60, and I heard consistently, are you meeting other people like me? Because if you are, I would like to meet them too. So I made some one-on-one connections, but they started coming in, so many of these questions about making these connections. I said, I think what we should do is get everybody together. So in Sun Valley, Idaho, 10 years ago, in, that would be Dollar Lounge, we met for the first time. Now that first morning I gave a presentation, it was about 20 slides. Two of them I want to highlight. One is the hero's journey. I am a huge fan of Joseph Campbell and his writings. And this idea around mythology of all great civilization is the concept of the hero's journey. And I really deeply felt that the people in that room in October 2023 were heroic, because they were defying society's definition of business success to do something they felt was right, and it was just the right thing to do. And that to me was quite powerful. And secondly, this other idea from Joseph Campbell, that if you're following your bliss, whether it be in business or in life or whatever pursuit, if it's truly your bliss, what you should be doing and not what others telling you you should be doing, unexpected doors will open for you. And I heard that story from many of these entrepreneurs, and frankly, I was feeling it myself. It was very powerful. So the next day, I didn't sleep that night. I was so excited. It had gone so much better than I thought. So I created this logo in advance, and I knew either I was going to throw it away because this was going to bomb, or things were going to go well and I might present it. And I knew I had to present this. So I basically said to the group, I said, with your permission, I would like to start Tugboat Institute. And I'd like to do that to serve you in the next chapter of my life. But I will only do it with your permission, because I don't need to do something you don't want. And got a very positive response. So I said, okay guys, here we are. Today, we're co-founding together the Tugboat Institute. And that's what we did on that day. So a couple of months later, Chris Alden, who was a very close colleague of mine and helped in the learning journey experience, helped put on the first Tugboat Summit, put on the second summit. He said, Dave, I'm a little concerned. He goes, I think people really like this idea of an evergreen company, an evergreen business. It's got natural resonance, but somebody's going to try to steal it from us. Some VC firm or private equity, let's say that they back evergreen companies, and because we haven't defined it, they can do that. So let's put more definition to it. Plus it'll help people understand, should they be part of this group we're creating? So I spent quite a bit of time on this, a lot of hikes, a lot of reflection, and from my experience at HP all the way through that event in October. And this is what I came up with. And I called it a straw man because I wasn't sure if I had it right or not. So I said, look, here's what I think I've heard from you. I think this does represent what is core to building a lasting evergreen company for over 100 years. As you know, it's purpose, perseverance, people first, private profit, paced growth, and pragmatic innovation. I said, poke holes in this. But instead of people poking holes in it, I got, hey, that's pretty good. That actually is a very good reflection of the company I've been trying to build for the last 10, 20, 30 years. And as you know, 10 years later, this really is our core framework. And my learning journey continued. Within a month of that first summit, I went out to Cary, North Carolina. And I met this gentleman, Jim Goodnight, 40-year-old company, Rich Calgard, at the time at Forbes, has said to me, I believe this is the heir to Hewlett-Packard at the SAS Institute with Jim Goodnight. And we had a deep connection. We talked a lot about people first and a lot about innovation. But most importantly for me, all of those things it was a big company. It was the biggest company I had talked to that was truly an evergreen company in our definition. Then I met this gentleman, you probably recognize him, Jack Stack. He cooks a good steak. And Jack exposed me to employee ownership. He said, look, there's these wonderful evergreen companies. I'm one of those, but we're owned by our employees. And I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought of that. That's a pretty powerful idea. He also exposed me to open book management, took me on the factory's floor, and I talked to some of the manufacturing workers, and I gotta tell you, it felt like I was back at HP. It was pretty powerful for me. Then I met this gentleman, Val Hollingsworth. At the time, his company was 290 years old. He was CEO of a company that was 290 years old, older than the United States of America. And I was like, wow, this is powerful. Val's like, we're an evergreen company too. So I'm seeing larger companies, older companies, different ownership types. I'm actually seeing them in all these different industries. This is just a map of the industries that the members are currently part of. Just remarkable to me. And then, as you know, we started on the west coast of the United States. And then we hopped into the Midwest with the help of Spencer Burke. And then Bo's Inc. article was quite powerful too in kind of getting the word out. And then we got into Canada. We had members in Mexico, the UK, Australia, Chile, Switzerland, and Latvia. We've had members from all these different countries over the last 10 years. So I want to come back to this 100-year time frame. You guys remember that kind of situation I described earlier? And let's think about it. If you had a company today that has strived through the last 100 years, what have you been through? You've been through a dramatic stock market crash. You've been through the Great Depression. You've been through World War II. You'd think that might be enough, right, to break any company. And then some incredible inventions, the discovery of the double helix, the civil rights movement in the 1960s, the man on the moon, one of the most inspiring events in the late 1960s, and all of the technology and know-how that was required to do that successfully. And the oil embargo, and the rise of the PC, and disco, we had to get through disco together. And then the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the reopening of Europe, the introduction of the World Wide Web, it wasn't that long ago. And then the creation of the World Trade Organization, which led to globalization and the rise of the Chinese economy. The iPhone, the housing crisis and the Great Recession, then of course COVID more recently, with supply chain issues, labor shortages, the overstimulation creating this record high inflation, and also in the year of COVID, the crisis of Memorial Day, which reminded an entire generation that we still have a rights gap to work on together. And then this amazing technology, LLMs, AI, whatever you want to call it, represented by ChatGPT, which may be just as big or bigger than the World Wide Web, the iPhone, and the PC. So this is incredible. We have 30 members of Tugboat Institute that are over 100 years old. They've been through that entire 100-year period. Changing customer needs, new technology, changing societal norms, all of those things they've adapted successfully through. I love to talk about all 30, but I'm gonna highlight 6. 3 brands you probably know and 3 you probably don't, but just to show you that evergreens are everywhere. So Radio Flyer, Robert Passon, his grandfather Antonio started the firm back in 1923. He was making wooden cabinetry and these Liberty coasters. Lisa Ingram, her great-grandfather Billy Ingram, was serving hamburgers, pie, coffee, and Coke at 7 locations, decades before McDonald's was even founded. And then Edward Jones, he was sitting in downtown St. Louis in an office with a desk, 2 chairs, and a coat rack. That was Edward Jones. Today run by Penny Pennington, the sixth managing partner, at a scale and a level of impact I'm sure Edward could not have even imagined back then. And then three that may be less well known, but just as important. I talked about Hollingsworth and Vos a moment ago, now run by Josh Ayer. Val became chairman. This company, remarkably, I'm gonna go back further than 1923. Ben Franklin was one of their early customers, bought their paper products to print on. Today, SpaceX and Tesla are one of their customers, Elon Musk. So from Franklin to Musk in one company, that is the coolest thing. And then the Betts Company. Not many people know the Betts Company, run by Bill Betts, but in 1923 it was operating in downtown San Francisco on Folsom Street, making heavy-duty truck springs. Could you imagine there in downtown San Francisco, a manufacturing company? Not today. Today they're in the Central Valley near Fresno, and they're making sure people like firemen are safely driving around in their trucks. And this company, Victaulic, this company has an interesting story because it had roots with John Rockefeller. And his associate, Dr. Bradford, said there's interesting technology coming out of the UK for pipe couplings, and we should license that technology and have it as a Standard Oil product. Rockefeller said, no, that's not our business. We're not going to do that. But if you want to pursue it, you can. You can be an owner of that business and that license. You can never work in this business, and no family member can ever work in this business. That business today is extremely successful. Those fittings are in about 60% of all commercial buildings in the United States. And if you go to New York City to the 9/11 Memorial, and you go to those beautiful fountains, those two fountains, see all that water moving through it, their products are central to the movement of that water. And that's today run by Rick Butcher. So let's come back to this long-term view. And I want to bring evergreen companies into this picture. The time frame of an evergreen company is so far beyond the others, it's impossible almost to measure. This is 100 squares representing 100 years. But the truth is, the owners of evergreen businesses have no time frame on their businesses. These businesses are designed to live beyond their lifetimes, or these others, a year, 2 years, maybe 3 if you're lucky. And I made those dark boxes across the top because I've heard this from you. You guys easily talk about the next 10 years. What should we be doing today that will put us in a good position in the next 10 years? What's the right thing to do today for the next 10 years and 20 years and 50 years? And sometimes I've heard over 100 years and kind of thinking about decisions and strategies. It's incredibly powerful, the timeframes in which you guys operate in. And we asked this question during the membership process of all new candidates, and of course they all believe they're evergreen companies, otherwise they wouldn't be coming through the process. And we say, what do you think is the source of strategic advantage of an evergreen company? And we get different answers, but the number one answer, vast majority of the time, the long-term view. Just as HP, the long-term view. Just as Jessica Heron said to me, Dave, you're not understanding, you're not taking the long-term view on this. So I've learned many things from you all, but 3 things about the long-term view I've learned that I want to share back to you. These stand out for me, they just stand out for me. The first is that time in the long-term view enables compounding. And I think most of us understand this in the context of capital. Warren Buffett talks about this all the time. You have to have investments last for a very long time because they compound in value. And a 15% compounding curve is much more powerful than a straight interest 15% curve. In fact, the delta over 30 years is over 30x. But here's what I learned from you. I knew about capital. What I didn't know is about all the other things that compound, and you've taught me this. Culture and people compound over time. Relationships, internally and externally, with, for example, key suppliers, they compound over time. Innovations in intellectual property, operational efficiency and scalability, and very important, company reputation and brand. If you do the right thing over long periods of time, you'll build a wonderful brand, and that is incredibly important. So that's one, the power of compounding on a lot more than just capital. The second, because evergreen companies do not have an expiration date, evergreen owners do not play a zero-sum game. This is a very powerful and important idea. Evergreen companies strive for long-term win-win dynamics with their entire ecosystem. Why? Because you can't cheat your partners if you want to be around 100 years from now. You have to be consistent, you have to be even-keeled, and you have to be fair. So you seek win-wins in all dimensions around the company itself. And this really does contrast to VC, private equity, and public companies that can be forced into very tough win-lose trade-offs by their owners. especially when they miss the plan, salesforce.com, look at that, or they're being dressed up for a sale and everybody wants the highest growth rates, highest cash flows, even if it's straining every bit of that team. Third, and this is the one that is the most powerful for me, is I've observed over the last 10 years that evergreen leaders and evergreen owners actually have a higher consciousness about their relationship with other human beings. It's a really profound thing. On the left, this is a slide that Jeet Kumar shared from this stage last year. He said, what is life all about? He said, it's being the source of love and leadership. Love and leadership. On the right, this was me driving into Panda Express's headquarters. I said, oh, that's a cool sculpture. I'm gonna take a picture. So I took a picture of the sculpture. 2 months ago, I was at their 50th anniversary of the formation of the Panda Restaurant Group. And Peggy Chern, the co-founder, got up on the stage and she said, why do we do this? She said, because of love. We love you, our colleagues, and we love our customers. That's why we do it. And I think this is really profound because before I started meeting you, I have never heard the word love used in the context of business. And that's a very powerful idea. And if you think about this very short time we have on Earth, to be able to make that kind of a commitment to other people is a pretty unique and special thing. So I'm going to come back to a conversation I had with George Parker, who I have tremendous admiration for. He's a professor at Stanford Business School in finance. He was also the dean for a period of time. And early in my learning journey, this is probably 2013, early 2014, he's like, Dave, I'm pretty intrigued by this idea of evergreen companies. You might be onto something. He goes, and you're pretty passionate about it too. I'm surprised. But let me just remind you, Dave, the greatest calling of a company is to be a public company. I said, George, I don't know. I'm seeing some pretty interesting behaviors and values, and I don't know. But let's just agree to disagree. Is that fair? Can we just agree to disagree? And we did. We agreed to disagree. I will tell you, 10 years later, I would not agree to disagree. I fully disagree, because I believe the greatest calling of a company today is to be an evergreen company. Hands down, it's to be an evergreen company. Thank you. So, as I look forward to the next 100 years, 21, 23, I am very optimistic. I'm not saying we aren't going to have some hard times ahead of us. In fact, I think some of you are feeling that even today, looking into the next year. But if you look back at the last 100 years and the ability of evergreen companies to navigate that, we can do this. We can absolutely do this. We can honor our purpose. We can take care of our people. We can be successful against all of the evergreen 7 Ps, and we can make significant contributions to our society. So I actually want to thank you on this anniversary. I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you for protecting your companies, for adapting your companies, for growing your companies, because it's an incredible contribution to our society. And I said this in 2010, I'll say it again, you guys are heroic. It's a really heroic thing you're doing. And I am honored to serve you, my team is honored to serve you, and I hope we have the opportunity to do that for a very long time. Thank you very much.